He wasn't supposed to be at the funeral. Not after what he'd done. Not after the silence he'd chosen, twice, when speaking would have changed everything. But Dominic Ashford stood at the back of the chapel anyway, silver threading through dark hair that had once been black as ink. His Brioni suit was the color of charcoal, expensive in a way that didn't announce itself. He didn't approach the casket where Margaret Hale lay surrounded by white roses and the kind of reverential silence reserved for women who'd shaped cities with checkbooks and iron will. He just watched as Eleanor Hale placed a single white rose on her mother's chest, her fingers steady, her face a study in the kind of control that comes from years of practice. She hadn't seen him yet. 23 years, and he could still count the exact number of steps it would take to reach her. 17 from where he stood. 12 if he cut through the center aisle. He didn't move. The last time he'd been this close to Eleanor Catherine Hale, she'd been 26 years old, standing in his apartment doorway with tears streaming down her face, asking him why. Why he wouldn't answer her calls. Why he'd disappeared. Why 3 days before, he'd loved her enough to talk about forever, and now he wouldn't even look at her. He hadn't answered then. He wasn't sure he could answer now. But Margaret Hale, brilliant, ruthless, strategic Margaret, had made sure he'd have to try. I need you to stay with me through this one. It's going to hurt in all the right ways. Tell me before we go any further, do you believe two people can love each other twice? Or does the second time just prove the first one never ended? Drop a comment. I want to know what you think before this breaks you. Eleanor's mother had been a force of nature. Margaret Hale. Philanthropist. Patron of the arts. Guardian of Boston's oldest and most influential charitable foundation. The kind of woman who could silence a boardroom with a look and had personally funded the educations of 300 first-generation college students over 4 decades. She'd also been the woman who'd stood in Dominic's office 23 years ago and made him an offer that had shaped everything that came after. He'd taken it. And Eleanor had never known. Now Margaret was gone, a stroke, sudden and merciless, and the terms of her will had summoned them both to the law offices of Castellane and Roth on a cold April morning that smelled like rain and the particular kind of ruin that comes from reopening graves you thought you'd sealed. Eleanor arrived first. She always had been punctual, even when they were young. Dominic watched her from the hallway before entering, standing in the shadow of a doorway like a voyeur or a ghost. She wore black, of course. A simple sheath dress that hung beautifully on a frame that was slimmer than he remembered but carried itself with the kind of elegance that didn't come from youth, it came from surviving things that should have broken you. Her hair had changed. Once it had been honey dark, thick, the kind of hair he used to wind around his fingers in lamplight. Now it was threaded with silver she didn't hide. She wore it pulled back in a low twist that exposed the line of her neck, the small scar behind her left ear from when she'd fallen off her bike at 14. He still remembered that scar. She removed her gloves slowly, deliberately, the way she used to turn pages of poetry in his college apartment, like every gesture mattered, like the world deserved attention. No wedding ring. She'd been widowed 6 years ago. He knew because he'd read the obituary. Read it 3 times, alone in his Dubai hotel room, and then gotten violently, stupidly drunk in a way he hadn't since he was 25 and first realized what he'd given up. But she wore a thin gold band on her right hand. Simple. Old. His chest tightened. He'd given her that ring when they were 24 and stupid enough to think love was the only currency that mattered, before he'd learned that sometimes love was the thing you traded for a future, and sometimes you spent the rest of your life wondering if you'd made a profit or a loss. When he stepped into the conference room, her spine stiffened before she even turned around. Some part of her body had recognized his presence before her mind caught up. Dominic. His name and her voice still did things to him he had absolutely no right to feel. Her voice had changed too. Lower. More controlled. But underneath he could still hear the girl who used to laugh at his terrible jokes, who'd once fallen asleep on his shoulder during a 12-hour drive to Montreal, who'd whispered "I love you" into his neck at 4 a.m. like it was a secret the universe needed to overhear. Eleanor. She turned fully then, and her eyes, amber-flecked green, the color of sea glass held up to sunlight, met his with a flatness that hurt more than anger would have. "I thought you'd send a representative." "You usually do. Your mothers will specify my personal attendance." "How inconvenient for you." The lawyer, a thin, nervous man named Patterson with wire-rimmed glasses and the careful manner of someone used to delivering bad news to rich people, cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" They sat on opposite sides of the mahogany conference table. An ocean of polished wood between them, 12 feet that might as well have been 12,000 miles. Patterson opened a leather portfolio embossed with Margaret's initials. Margaret's estate was considerable, though not surprising. The Hale Family Foundation. Properties in 3 states. An art collection valued at $18 million, including 2 Sargent portraits and a hopper that museums had been trying to acquire for decades. Eleanor listened without expression as parcels were divided, assets allocated. She'd been expecting this, probably. The clean, orderly distribution of wealth among surviving family members and the institutions her mother had supported. Then Patterson read the clause that changed everything. His voice was steady, professional, and completely at odds with the words coming out of his mouth. "To my daughter, Eleanor Catherine Hale, and to Dominic James Ashford, I leave joint trusteeship of the Hale Foundation, contingent upon the following terms. Both parties must serve a minimum of 1 year in active co-stewardship, commencing no later than June 1st of this year. Both parties must reside at the Foundation's primary estate in Constance, Maine, for no fewer than 10 months during said period of service. Neither party may delegate primary responsibilities to subordinates or representatives. Both must attend all board meetings, site visits, and donor events together. Should either party refuse these terms, or should either party abandon the arrangement before the completion of 1 full year, the Foundation's assets, currently valued at approximately $340 million, will be dissolved immediately and distributed to the secondary beneficiaries listed in Appendix C. Silence. The kind of silence that has weight and temperature. Eleanor's hands, resting flat on the table, did not move. Her face remained perfectly composed. But Dominic saw it, the flutter at the base of her throat. The pulse point jumping. "This is," she stopped. Drew a breath through her nose. Started again. "This is absurd." Patterson adjusted his glasses. "Your mother was quite explicit in her intentions, Miss Hale. She had our firm review and revise these terms 4 times over the past 2 years. 2 years. Margaret had been planning this for 2 years. Eleanor's laugh was soft and bitter. My mother has been dead for 4 days and she's still manipulating my life from beyond the grave. There are additional stipulations, Patterson continued, flipping a page. The Constance estate has been prepared with separate living quarters. Staff have been retained. A detailed operational plan for the foundation's year has been drafted and who are the secondary beneficiaries? Dominic asked quietly. Patterson's expression flickered. A consortium of organizations Mrs. Hale, let's say she had complicated relationships with, none of which align with the Foundation's mission. Should the assets be dissolved, the Foundation's 43 years of work would effectively be dismantled. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were bright with something that might have been tears or rage or both. Of course. Of course she stopped herself. Stood abruptly. When does this year begin? June 1st. You have approximately 10 weeks to arrange your affairs. Eleanor turned to Dominic then, and her gaze was the same one she'd given him 23 years ago in his apartment doorway, wounded and furious and looking for something to strike at. You can't possibly agree to this. Can't I? You run a global private equity firm. You have offices in 12 countries. You're on the board of half the Fortune 500. You personally manage $17 billion in assets. Her voice was tight, controlled. You don't have 10 months to spend in coastal Maine playing philanthropist with your ex-girlfriend. The word hung between them. Ex-girlfriend. As if that was all they'd been. As if they hadn't planned a life together, hadn't talked about children and the house they'd buy and how they'd grow old on a porch somewhere watching the world spin. Your mother thought otherwise, he said. My mother, Eleanor said, each word precisely placed, didn't know you anymore. But you did, he thought. Once. You knew me better than anyone ever has. The terms are binding, Patterson interjected. Both parties must agree or the foundation dissolves. Miss Hale, your mother entrusted you with this legacy. Mr. Ashford, Mrs. Hale specifically requested your involvement. She believed, and I'm quoting her words here, that you both had unfinished business that had waited long enough. Eleanor's breath caught. Just for a second. Dominic leaned back in his chair, studying the woman across from him. The girl he'd loved had been full of fire and optimism, convinced they could change the world if they just worked hard enough and wanted it badly enough. The woman she'd become was harder, more guarded, shaped by losses he'd only read about in newspapers and society pages. But underneath, he could still see her. Still see the Eleanor who used to fall asleep with books on her chest, who cried during orchestral crescendos, who'd once told him she wanted to build a life that mattered more than money. She'd done it. Without him. I'll do it, he said. Eleanor's head snapped toward him. What? I accept the terms. 1 year. Constance, Maine. Co-trusteeship. He met her gaze steadily. Your mother asked. I owe her that much. You don't owe her anything. Don't I? Something flickered across her face, confusion, maybe, or the first edge of suspicion. Why? Her voice dropped. Why would you do this? He could have said a dozen things. That he respected Margaret despite everything. That the foundation mattered. That his lawyers had reviewed the will and found no viable way to contest it without destroying the organization in the process. Instead, he told her a version of the truth. Because I never stopped wondering what would have happened if I'd chosen differently. The words landed like stones in still water. Eleanor stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she gathered her purse, her gloves, her composure. I need to think about this. Eleanor. Don't. She held up a hand. Don't say anything else. I'll have my answer by the end of the week. She walked out, and Dominic let her go, because 23 years ago he'd learned that sometimes the worst thing you can do to someone you love is chase them when they're trying to run. She called 4 days later. I'll do it, she said without preamble. For the foundation. For my mother's legacy. Not for you. Understood. There will be ground rules. I'd expect nothing less. We'll discuss them when we arrive. I'll be there June 1st. Don't come early. She hung up before he could respond. Dominic sat in his corner office, 53rd floor, views of Central Park, the kind of space that appeared in architectural magazines, and looked out at the city he'd conquered. It felt hollow. It had felt hollow for 23 years. Constance, Maine was not the kind of place billionaires summered. It was cold, even in June. The foundation estate sat on 12 acres of rocky Atlantic coastline, a sprawling Victorian painted pale gray with darker gray trim, widow's walks on the roof, weather-beaten shingles, windows that rattled in the wind. It had been built in 1887 by a shipping magnate, passed through 3 families, and finally purchased by the Hale Foundation in 1981 as both headquarters and retreat. Eleanor had spent childhood summers here. Dominic had seen photos once, years ago, a young Eleanor in overalls, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a bucket of crabs. The staff had prepared separate wings. His quarters were in the east, a suite with a bedroom, office, and private sitting room. Hers were in the west, identical in layout but decorated differently. They would share common spaces, the kitchen, the main library, the formal dining room, the terraces. They would not lack for space. They would lack for escape. Eleanor arrived the day before him, which Dominic suspected was entirely intentional. When his car, a town car, not the Bentley, he wasn't trying to make a statement, pulled up the gravel drive, she was already standing on the front porch in jeans and a white linen shirt, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Behind her, the house loomed like something out of a Gothic novel. There are ground rules, she said before he'd even closed the car door. He couldn't help it. He smiled. Good morning to you, too, Eleanor. I'm serious, Dominic. I don't doubt it. She descended the porch steps, and he noticed she was barefoot. Her toenails were painted a soft coral. It was such a small, human detail that it nearly undid him. We are colleagues, she said. Professional partners in the administration of this foundation. Nothing more. We attend board meetings together, review grant proposals, make public appearances as required. Outside of those duties, we maintain separate lives and stay out of each other's way. Agreed. She blinked, clearly surprised he hadn't argued. You're not going to fight me on this. Why would I? Your right to establish boundaries. Hi, she seemed momentarily off balance. All right. Good. Anything else? Yes. She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture of self-protection he recognized. We don't talk about the past. We don't rehash old arguments. We don't dig up graves that should stay buried. Eleanor. And we don't, her voice caught slightly. We don't pretend this is anything other than what it is. A legal obligation. A professional arrangement. 1 year, and then we're done. He looked at her for a long moment. The morning light was soft, filtering through the trees, and it caught the silver in her hair, the fine lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there before. Time had refined her, sharpened her, made her more herself. She was 51 years old. She'd buried a mother and a husband. She'd built a life that mattered, carved out an identity separate from her family name. She'd survived him. And she was terrified he was going to hurt her again. All right, he said quietly. No pretending. Professional only. Thank you. But Eleanor. Yes. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For all of it. For then, and for putting you in this position now. Her expression shuddered immediately. I don't want your apologies. I know. But you have them anyway. He picked up his bag and walked into the house, leaving her standing in the sunlight, and he didn't look back because if he had, he might have seen that her hands were shaking. I need to know something. Whose side are you on right now? His, for showing up after all these years, for trying. Or hers, for every wall she's building to protect herself. Tell me in the comments. I'm curious who you'd trust standing in that driveway. The first month was professional. Polite. Arctic. They worked in adjacent offices on the second floor, his facing east toward the ocean, hers facing west toward the gardens. The walls were thick but not thick enough. He could hear her on phone calls, her voice warm and engaged when she spoke to program directors, scholarship recipients, donor prospects. She never sounded that way with him. Their interactions were brief, cordial, bloodless. Morning meetings to review the day's agenda. Afternoon sessions to go through grant applications. Evening debriefs on upcoming events. They were never in the same room for more than an hour. Eleanor treated him like a colleague she barely knew, pleasant but distant, professional but cold. She called him Dominic, never Dom, never the shortened version she'd used when they were young. She didn't laugh at his jokes. Didn't reference any shared history. Acted as if they'd just met, as if there wasn't a chasm of memory and regret between them. It was driving him quietly insane. The Foundation's work, at least, was absorbing. They funded arts education in underserved schools. Literacy programs. Scholarships for first-generation college students. Music therapy for hospice patients. Creative writing workshops in prisons. Eleanor knew every grantee by name. Every program director. Every student who'd received a scholarship in the past decade. She visited schools, sat in on fourth-grade reading circles, attended student art shows. She wrote personal notes to scholarship recipients, handwritten, on cream stationery, congratulating them on their achievements and asking about their lives. Dominic watched her the way you watch something fragile and fierce, carefully, from a distance, aware you could break it just by getting too close. She was brilliant at this. Patient, strategic, genuinely invested. She'd found her calling, and it suited her in ways that made his chest ache. He threw himself into the operational side. Financial structures, investment strategies, long-term sustainability plans. His world had been numbers and deals for so long that it was easy to slip back into that mode, find the inefficiencies, optimize returns, ensure the foundation could operate in perpetuity. They made a good team, actually. Her vision and relationships, his analytical rigor and business acumen. They just never talked about it. But the house was old, and sound carried, and walls were only so thick. He heard her at night sometimes. Heard her moving through the hallways at 2 a.m, the soft pad of bare feet on hardwood. Heard water running in the kitchen. Heard the back door open and close as she walked down to the water. She couldn't sleep either. 3 weeks in, he followed. It was past midnight. The house was dark except for the lamp he'd left on in his office. He'd been reviewing portfolio allocations, trying to figure out how to restructure the foundation's endowment to generate higher returns without increasing risk, when he heard her door open. Footsteps. The stairs. The kitchen. He waited 10 minutes. Then followed. She was standing at the edge of the rocks, barefoot, wrapped in an oversized cardigan that might have been her husband's once. The ocean was restless, the waves breaking white in the moonlight. The air smelled like salt and cold and distance. Couldn't sleep? He asked from behind her. She didn't startle. Didn't turn. I never sleep well in this house. Why not? Too many ghosts. He moved closer, stopping a careful distance away. Close enough to talk, far enough to give her space. Of your mother. Of everything. She exhaled slowly, her breath visible in the cool air. I spent summers here as a child. Every June through August. My father proposed to my mother on that terrace. She gestured vaguely behind them. I had my first kiss on the dock. I used to think this place was magic. And now? She turned to look at him then, and in the moonlight her face was softer, more vulnerable. Now I think it's haunted by every version of myself I used to be. He understood that. God, he understood that. Why did you really come, Dominic? Her voice was quieter now, tired. You could have fought the will. You have entire legal teams. You could have found a way out of this. So could you. I can't walk away from my mother's legacy. This foundation is, she stopped. It's the thing she was most proud of. More than her marriage, more than me, more than anything. I can't let it dissolve. Neither can I. But why? You didn't even know her. Not really. You met her maybe 3 times before, she caught herself. Before I left. Before I broke your heart. Before I chose money over you. She knew me, he said quietly. Eleanor frowned. What does that mean? It means your mother understood exactly who I was. What I wanted. What I'd sacrifice to get it. He looked out at the ocean, at the endless dark. And she knew that would matter to me now. That I'd come because she asked. Because it was the only way to. To what? He turned back to her. To see you again. The words hung between them like smoke. Eleanor wrapped her arms tighter around herself. Don't. Don't what? Don't rewrite history. Don't make yourself the tragic hero who loved me all along. You left, Dominic. You walked away and you never looked back. I looked back every single day. Then why didn't you come back? Because, he stopped. This was it. The edge of the truth he'd carried for 23 years. Because your mother asked me not to. Eleanor went very still. What? Your mother came to my office 3 days before I was supposed to propose to you. You were going to propose. The shock in her voice nearly broke him. Yes. I had a ring. I had a plan. I was going to take you to that terrible Italian restaurant you loved, the one with the murals and the singing waiters, and I was going to ask you to marry me. Eleanor's hand went to her throat. I didn't know. Your mother did. How? I called her. Asked for her blessing. I thought, he laughed bitterly. I thought I was doing the right thing. Being respectful. Honoring tradition. What did she say? She said she wanted to discuss it in person. So she came to my office. I was 26, working at a mid-level consulting firm, making $60,000 a year, drowning in student debt. And your mother, elegant, powerful Margaret Hale, sat across from me in her Chanel suit and told me she had a proposition. Eleanor was barely breathing. What kind of proposition? There was an acquisition opportunity. The Ashford Group. Distressed asset, incredible potential, completely out of my reach financially. It would have taken me 10 years to save enough to even make a down payment on the kind of capital I'd need. What does this have to do with? Your mother offered to finance it. The entire acquisition. She had connections, capital, influence. She could make it happen. Why would she do that? Because, Dominic said, and his voice was steady even though his hands were shaking, there was one condition. I had to walk away from you. Completely. No contact, no explanation, no gradual distance. Just gone. She said if I loved you, I'd let you go. That I was brilliant but reckless, that I'd drag you into a life of uncertainty and risk. She said you deserved stability, security, a future that wasn't built on dreams and debt. The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor stared at him like he'd just spoken in a language she didn't understand. You're lying. I'm not. My mother would never. She would. And she did. He took a breath. She told me you had a future. A real one. That I was going to destroy it with my ambition and my arrogance. She said she'd watched men like me before, smart, driven, convinced they could have everything, and she'd seen how they burned through the people who loved them. She said if I really cared about you, I'd take the deal. Build the empire I wanted without dragging you down in the process. So you just, what? Agreed. Took her money and disappeared. I was 26 years old and terrified. Terrified I'd fail. Terrified I'd prove her right and ruin your life trying to build mine. So yes. I took the deal. You son of a bitch. Yes. You let me think, her voice cracked. For 23 years, I thought you just didn't love me enough. I thought I wasn't enough. Eleanor. I blamed myself. I went through everything we'd ever said, every conversation, looking for the moment I'd failed you, the moment you'd stopped wanting me. And all this time, it was a business transaction. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Dominic? Tell me. Explain to me how selling our future for seed capital was anything other than exactly what my mother said about you, that you'd sacrifice anything for ambition. The accusation hit like a physical blow because it was true. It was all true. You're right, he said quietly. Your mother saw who I was more clearly than I saw myself. I chose the deal. I chose the future I could build over the one we'd planned. And I've regretted it every single day since. Regret doesn't change anything. I know. It doesn't give me back those years. Doesn't undo what I went through after you left. What do you mean? Eleanor laughed, and it was the saddest sound he'd ever heard. You want to know what happened after you disappeared? After I spent 2 weeks calling you, leaving messages, showing up at your apartment until your roommate finally told me you'd moved and left no forwarding address? Eleanor. I was pregnant. The world stopped. Time stopped. His heart stopped. What? 6 weeks pregnant when you left. I didn't know yet. Didn't realize until 2 weeks after you'd vanished. Her voice was eerily calm, like she was reciting facts about someone else's life. I was going to tell you. I had this whole plan. I was terrified and excited and convinced we'd figure it out together. Dominic couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't process what she was saying. I tried to find you. I went to your office. They said you'd quit. I called your parents. They said they hadn't heard from you. I was alone and pregnant, and the person I loved most in the world had disappeared without a trace. Eleanor, I didn't. I lost the baby. The words were flat, final. 12 weeks. I was in my apartment, studying for finals, and I started cramping. Bleeding. By the time I got to the hospital, it was over. The doctor said it was common. Said these things just happened sometimes. Said I was young, I'd have other children. Tears were streaming down his face. He didn't remember when he'd started crying. But I didn't want other children, Eleanor continued. I wanted that child. Yours. Ours. And after I lost it, I couldn't, her voice broke finally. I couldn't even tell you because you were gone. You were just gone. I'm sorry. The words were completely inadequate. Eleanor, I'm so sorry. My mother knew. She laughed bitterly. Of course she knew. I told her. She held me while I cried. She paid for the hospital bills. She was the one who convinced me to finish school, to keep going. And I never knew. She turned to him, and her face was wet with tears. I never knew she was the reason you'd left in the first place. If I had known, it wouldn't have changed anything. Eleanor's voice was hard now, angry. You wanted the deal more than you wanted me. That's the truth we've both been avoiding. My mother just gave you an excuse to take what you already wanted. That's not. Isn't it? Be honest, Dominic. If she'd come to you and said, "Here's the money, no strings attached," would you have turned it down to stay with me? Would you have chosen love over ambition? He wanted to say yes. Wanted to tell her that he would have chosen her, always her, that the deal meant nothing compared to what they'd had. But she was asking for honesty. And the honest answer was, he didn't know. He'd been 26 and hungry and convinced he could change the world if someone just gave him a chance. He'd loved Eleanor desperately. But he'd also lain awake at night dreaming about the empire he'd build, the legacy he'd leave, the proof that a kid from a middle-class family in Ohio could matter. The silence stretched between them, and in it, Eleanor found her answer. "That's what I thought," she said softly. She turned and walked back to the house, and this time when Dominic watched her go, he understood that some distances couldn't be crossed. Some choices couldn't be unmade. Some losses were permanent. "I need you to stop for a second. Just stop and breathe. Tell me what you're feeling right now. One word. Just one. Drop it in the comments. Because if this is breaking you the way it's breaking me, I need to know I'm not alone." They didn't speak for 3 days. Eleanor avoided him completely. Took her meals in her room. Scheduled her meetings for times when he was occupied elsewhere. Moved through the house like a ghost, there but not there. Dominic let her have the space because what else could he do? He worked. Made phone calls. Reviewed portfolios. Pretended the foundation was the only thing that mattered. At night, he stood at his window and watched the light in her room go on and off, and he knew she wasn't sleeping either. On the 4th day, there was a crisis. One of the foundation's largest grants, a literacy program serving 3,000 children across 5 counties, was being audited. Discrepancies had appeared in the financials. Funds potentially misused or misallocated. The program director was panicking. The board was demanding answers. The local news was starting to ask questions. If the program collapsed, 3,000 children would lose access to reading tutors, library resources, after-school support. Eleanor called an emergency meeting. They sat across from each other at the conference table, the same table where they'd learned the terms of Margaret's will, and for the first time in days, she looked directly at him. "We need to fix this," she said. "Agreed. I don't care what's between us personally. Those children need this program." "I know. So we work together. We find the problem, we solve it, we save the program. Then we go back to avoiding each other. Whatever you need." Something flickered in her expression, surprise, maybe, or relief. "All right then." They worked 18-hour days for the next 2 weeks. Combed through every financial record from the past 3 years. Interviewed staff members. Reconstructed paper trails. Called in auditors, accountants, forensic specialists. The problem, when they finally found it, wasn't fraud. It was a catastrophically incompetent bookkeeper who'd been miscategorizing expenses, failing to file proper documentation, and generally creating a nightmare of compliance issues that looked suspicious but was actually just profound administrative negligence. They fixed it. Restructured the program's financial systems. Hired new staff. Reassured the board. Called every major donor personally to explain what had happened and what they'd done to ensure it wouldn't happen again. Eleanor cried when she called the program director to tell her the program was saved. Dominic heard her voice crack over the phone, heard her say, "We're not going to let those kids down. I promise." He pretended not to notice. But late that night, after everything was resolved, after the press releases had been sent and the board had been satisfied and the crisis had been averted, Eleanor knocked on his office door. He looked up from his laptop. She was standing in the doorway in yoga pants and an oversized MIT sweatshirt that had probably belonged to her late husband. Her hair was down, loose around her shoulders. She looked exhausted and beautiful and heartbreakingly vulnerable. "Can I come in?" "Of course." She sat in the chair across from his desk, curled her legs up under her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For the last 2 weeks. I couldn't have saved that program without you." "Yes, you could have. Maybe. But I didn't have to. That matters." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "Dominic, she stopped. Started again. I've spent 3 days being angry at you. Being angry at my mother. Being angry at the entire situation. And I'm still angry. I probably will be for a long time. I understand. But I also realized something." She met his eyes. "You were 26. I was 26. We were kids playing at being adults. And my mother, she was wrong to do what she did, but she wasn't wrong about everything. You were ambitious. You did want more than we could build together at that age. And maybe if we'd gotten married, had the baby, tried to make it work, maybe it would have destroyed us anyway. Or maybe we'd have figured it out. Maybe." She smiled sadly. "But we'll never know, will we? And I'm tired of living in the past. Tired of letting what happened define everything that comes after." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," she paused. "I'm saying we have 8 more months together in this house. 8 months of working on something that actually matters. And I don't want to spend them punishing you for decisions we both made when we were too young to understand what they'd cost." Hope, dangerous and sharp, pierced through his chest. "Eleanor. I'm not forgiving you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm willing to try something else." "What?" "To see if we can be friends. Colleagues. Maybe even partners who don't hate each other." She stood. "My mother brought us here for a reason. Maybe it was cruelty. Maybe it was manipulation. Or maybe," her voice softened, "maybe she wanted to give us a chance to stop haunting each other." She left before he could respond, and Dominic sat alone in his office until dawn, wondering if redemption was something you earned or something you were given, and whether he deserved either. July brought heat and humidity and something like peace. They fell into a rhythm. Morning coffee on the terrace, reviewing the day's agenda. Working in their separate offices but with doors open. Lunch together in the kitchen, talking about grants and programs and nothing personal. Evenings walking the property, discussing strategy, occasionally lapsing into comfortable silence. They were learning each other again. Not the people they'd been, but the people they'd become. Eleanor told him about her late husband, Richard. A professor of American literature. Kind, stable, present in ways Dominic had never been. They'd had 15 years together before cancer took him. No children. After losing the baby, Eleanor had struggled with fertility, and eventually, they'd made peace with it. "Did you love him?" Dominic asked one evening as they sat on the rocks watching the sun set. "Yes." She didn't hesitate. "Not the way I loved you. But maybe that was better. Safer. He never made me feel like I was competing with his dreams for his attention." The words stung, but they were fair. "I'm glad you had that," he said. "That you weren't alone." "Were you alone?" He considered lying. "Yes and no. There were women. Relationships that lasted a few months, maybe a year. But I never," he stopped. "Never what?" "Never let anyone close enough to matter. I told myself it was because I was too busy, too focused. But the truth is I was comparing them all to you. And nobody measured up to a memory." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then, "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard." "Is it sadder than what I did to you?" "No. Just different." They sat in silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, and Dominic thought maybe this was enough. This strange, careful friendship they were building. This second chance at knowing each other. Maybe it had to be enough. August brought a new kind of tension. They'd been working closely for months now, and the proximity was wearing down the walls Eleanor had built. He caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking. Saw the way her breath caught when their hands accidentally brushed reaching for the same document. The chemistry that had defined them at 24 was still there, simmering under the surface of every professional interaction. One night, they stayed late working on a grant proposal that was due in the morning. Eleanor was at the conference table, her reading glasses sliding down her nose, her hair falling out of its twist. She'd kicked off her shoes hours ago. Dominic brought her tea without asking. Green tea with honey, the way she used to drink it. She looked up, surprised. "You remembered." "I remember everything." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Eleanor set down her pen. "Dominic, we can't." "I know. This is already complicated enough without." "I know." "Then why are you looking at me like that?" "Like what?" "Like you're trying to memorize me." "Because I am." He sat down across from her. "Because in 4 months, this ends. The year is up, the foundation is secure, and we go back to our separate lives. And I don't know when I'll see you again. If I'll see you again." That was the deal. "I know." But Eleanor, he reached across the table, stopped just short of touching her hand. "Can I ask you something?" "Maybe. Do you ever wonder what it would be like if we tried again?" Her breath caught. "That's not fair." "I know. But I need to know if I'm the only one feeling this." For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, "You're not." The confession hung in the air like smoke. "But it doesn't matter," she continued. "We're not those people anymore. We can't just pick up where we left off." I'm not asking to pick up where we left off. I'm asking, he stopped. I don't know what I'm asking. Eleanor stood, gathering her papers. I need to go to bed. We can finish this in the morning. Eleanor, wait. She paused at the door, not turning around. My mother used to say that some doors close for a reason. That trying to force them open again just breaks what's left of the frame. What do you think? I think she was right about some things and wrong about others. She turned then, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. And I think I'm terrified to find out which category we fall into. She left, and Dominic sat alone in the conference room, surrounded by grant proposals and the ghost of what they'd been, and he understood that wanting something wasn't enough. It had never been enough. September brought a reckoning. The board meeting was scheduled for mid-month. 30 board members, major donors, program directors. A formal review of the foundation's performance under the new co-trusteeship. Black tie dinner, presentations, the whole production. Eleanor was nervous in a way Dominic had never seen her. She'd been preparing for weeks, reviewing every program outcome, every financial metric, every success story. They're going to judge us, she said the night before. Judge whether my mother made a mistake putting us in charge. You've done incredible work this year. The programs are thriving. We've done incredible work, she corrected. And that's what scares me. Why? Because at the end of the year, this ends. You go back to New York. I stay here. And who's going to run this thing the way we've been running it? It was the first time she'd acknowledged that their partnership worked. That together, they'd built something neither could have built alone. The board meeting went flawlessly. Eleanor presented with grace and passion. Dominic backed her up with data and financial projections. They moved together like they'd been doing this for years, anticipating each other's points, finishing each other's sentences. The board was impressed. More than impressed, awed. At the dinner afterward, a board member pulled Dominic aside. Whatever you're paying him, double it, she told Eleanor. I've never seen the foundation operate this efficiently. Eleanor smiled tightly. He's not on the payroll. Well, he should be. You two are remarkable together. After the last donor left, after the staff had cleaned up and gone home, Eleanor and Dominic stood alone on the terrace under a sky full of stars. They're right, you know, Eleanor said. We are good together. Yes. It's going to be hard to go back to running this alone. You won't be alone. You'll hire someone. It won't be the same. She turned to him. That's what I've been trying not to think about. That for the first time in 6 years, I haven't felt alone. And in 3 months, I will be again. Dominic's heart was racing. It doesn't have to be that way. What are you suggesting? I don't know. But Eleanor, he took her hands. Actually took them, skin on skin, the first time he deliberately touched her in months. This year has been the best year of my life since the day I walked away from you. Working with you, talking to you, just existing in the same space as you, it's made me remember who I used to be before I became the person your mother was afraid I'd be. Dominic. I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that maybe we were given this year for a reason. That maybe it's not about punishment or manipulation. Maybe it's about second chances. She looked down at their joined hands. I don't know if I can trust this. Trust us. I know. I don't know if I can survive you leaving again. Then I won't leave. She pulled away. Don't make promises you can't keep. I'm not. Eleanor, I'll. His phone rang. He should have ignored it. Should have let it ring and ring until it stopped. But old habits died hard, and he glanced at the screen. His CFO. Calling at 11 p.m. I need to take this, he said. I'm sorry. Just give me 5 minutes. He walked inside, answered the call. The crisis was immediate and catastrophic. The firm's largest acquisition, a deal 18 months in the making, $12 billion in play, was collapsing. Key financing had fallen through. The partner leading the deal had been arrested on insider trading charges. The whole thing was about to blow up in the most public, damaging way possible. You need to come back, his CFO said. Tomorrow. We need you here managing this or the entire firm could go down. Dominic looked through the window at Eleanor, still standing on the terrace, arms wrapped around herself. I can't. I'm in the middle of. Dominic, I'm not asking. The board is demanding your presence. If you're not here by Friday, they're calling for a vote of no confidence. You could lose the entire company. The company he'd built. 23 years of work. His legacy. Everything he'd sacrificed Eleanor for. I'll call you back, he said, and hung up. He walked back outside. Eleanor turned, and one look at his face told her everything. You have to go, she said flatly. There's a crisis. The firm. Of course there is. There's always a crisis. Her laugh was bitter. God, I'm so stupid. I actually started to believe this was real. It is real. No, Dominic. Real is showing up. Real is choosing to stay when it's hard. Real is not abandoning someone every time your empire calls. Her voice cracked. But that's who you are. Who you've always been. My mother was right about you. You'll always choose the deal. That's not fair. Isn't it? You're doing it right now. You're standing here calculating whether you can fix your crisis and come back, whether you can have both things, whether you can save your company and keep me. Tears were streaming down her face. And the answer is you can't. You never could. Eleanor, please. Go. The word was final. Go save your company. It's what you're good at. It's what you chose 23 years ago, and it's what you're choosing now. I'm not choosing. Then stay. Right now. Don't make the call. Don't get on the plane. Just stay. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Because she was right. He couldn't stay. The firm, hundreds of employees, thousands of investors, the entire structure he'd built, was at stake. People's jobs, pensions, futures. He couldn't just walk away. But standing here, looking at Eleanor's devastated face, he understood with perfect clarity what he was losing. Again. I have to go, he whispered. But I'll come back. I swear to you, I'll come back. Don't bother. Eleanor. The foundation is secure. We've met the terms of my mother's will. The board is satisfied. You can send a representative to fulfill the remaining months. We don't need to do this anymore. I need to. Well, I don't. She wiped her eyes roughly. Thank you for your service to the foundation. I'll have my lawyers send the paperwork releasing you from the agreement. You can't. Yes, I can. My mother's will said you had to stay 1 year or the foundation would dissolve. Well, the foundation isn't dissolving. The board supports us. The programs are thriving. We've proven we can co-manage this thing. You're free to go. I don't want to be free. Too bad. Because I'm done. I'm done being the person you sacrifice for your ambition. I'm done being the thing you regret but not enough to choose. She walked past him into the house, and this time when the door closed between them, it felt final. Dominic stood alone on the terrace as the night wind picked up off the ocean, and he understood that he'd been given a second chance at the thing that mattered most. And he'd failed it exactly the way he'd failed it before. Stop. I need you to be honest with me. Do you forgive him? Could you? He has hundreds of people depending on him, a company he built from nothing. But she's asking him to choose her. What would you do? Tell me. Because I'm not sure there's a right answer here. He went to New York. Spent 3 weeks putting out fires, restructuring deals, testifying before the board. Saved the company, barely. Lost sleep, lost weight, lost any sense that it mattered. Every night, he called Eleanor. Every night, she didn't answer. He left voicemails. Sent texts. Nothing accusatory, nothing desperate. Just, I'm thinking of you. I'm sorry. Please let me explain. Silence. He called the foundation. Her assistant said Miss Hale was unavailable. He tried reaching board members. They politely declined to get involved in personal matters. He'd been shut out completely. On the 24th day, his assistant brought him a package. Legal documents. A formal release from the terms of Margaret's will. A notarized statement that Dominic Ashford had fulfilled his obligations to the Hale Foundation and was free to resign his trusteeship effective immediately. Eleanor's signature at the bottom, precise and final. He signed it. What else could he do? His CFO threw a party celebrating his return, the company saved, crisis averted. Dominic attended for exactly 20 minutes before leaving. Went home to his penthouse, the one with the park views and the art collection and the furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. It was empty. It had always been empty. He stood at the window looking out at the city he'd conquered and understood that he'd won everything and lost the only thing that mattered. Again. 3 months later, in January, he got a call from Eleanor's lawyer. Miss Hale has requested your presence at the Foundation's Winter Gala, the lawyer said. She's being honored for her years of service. It would be appropriate for you to attend as former co-trustee. Will she be expecting me? I couldn't say, Mr. Ashford. He flew to Boston. Rented a car. Drove up the coast to Constance. The gala was being held at the estate, the house where they'd spend a year learning each other and losing each other all over again. He arrived late deliberately, slipping into the back of the room as Eleanor took the stage. She looked stunning. Silver gown, hair down, diamond earrings catching the light. She looked happy. Confident. Like someone who'd survived something and come out stronger. She looked like she didn't need him at all. She gave a speech about the foundation's work, about the programs they'd expanded, the lives they'd changed. She thanked the board, the staff, the donors. She didn't mention him. He stayed for the whole thing, standing in the shadows, and when it was over, when the crowd had dispersed and the house was quiet, he found her alone in the library. She was standing by the window, looking out at the ocean, and she didn't turn when he entered. "You came," she said quietly. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I wasn't sure." He moved closer, stopping a careful distance away. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something." "Dominic. Please." "I've had 3 months to think about what I should have said that night. Just give me 5 minutes." She turned then, and her expression was guarded but not closed. "All right. You were right. About everything. I chose the company. I chose the deal. I chose ambition over you." He took a breath. "But not because you didn't matter. Because I didn't know how to let the rest of it go. I'd spent 23 years building something I thought would make me complete. And when it was threatened, I panicked. I fell back into the person I'd been, the person your mother was afraid I'd be. I know. But I'm done. I've spent 3 months dismantling the empire I spent 23 years building. I've sold majority stake in the firm. I've stepped down from every board, resigned from every position. I'm free. Completely free." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Dominic, you can't, you shouldn't have done that for me. I didn't do it for you. I did it for me. Because I finally understood what your mother was trying to teach me." He moved closer. "She didn't bring us here to punish us. She brought us here to show me what I'd been missing. To let me see what a life of meaning looks like when you're brave enough to choose it." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to come back. Not as co-trustee. Not because of your mother's will. But because this past year, working with you, building something that matters, waking up every day knowing I was doing something good, it was the first time in 2 decades I felt like myself." He took her hands. "I'm saying I choose you, Eleanor. Finally. Completely. I choose this life, this work, this chance at something real." Tears were sliding down her cheeks. "What if it's too late?" "Then I'll wait. I'll work for the foundation in whatever capacity you'll let me. I'll live in the cottage down the road. I'll see you at board meetings and donor events, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I meant what I said." His voice cracked. "Because I love you. I've loved you for 23 years. And if I get one more chance, just one, I won't waste it." Eleanor was crying openly now. "You broke my heart. Twice. I know. I don't know if I can survive you doing it again." "You won't have to. Because I'm not leaving. Not for a crisis, not for a deal, not for anything. This is where I belong. With you." If you'll have me. For a long moment, she just looked at him, searching his face for something. Truth, maybe, or courage, or proof that this time would be different. Then she stepped forward and kissed him. It was soft, tentative, tasting of tears and possibility, and 23 years of longing finally allowed to surface. When they pulled apart, she whispered against his mouth, "If you leave me again, I'll destroy you." He laughed, and it felt like the first real laugh he'd had in months. "Fair. I'm serious. I know. And I won't. I promise you, Eleanor, I won't." She pulled back, studying him. "My mother would probably hate this, you know. She spent her whole life trying to keep us apart. Or maybe she spent her whole life trying to make sure that when we finally came back together, we were ready for it." Eleanor smiled, and it was the smile he remembered from when they were young, full of hope and fire and the kind of joy that made you believe anything was possible. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we start over. Properly this time. No secrets, no sacrifices, no choosing anything over each other." "That's a big promise." "Yes, it is." He cupped her face. "But I've spent 23 years living small. I'm ready to live big. With you." She kissed him again, deeper this time, and Dominic thought maybe redemption wasn't something you earned or were given, maybe it was something you built, day by day, choice by choice, with the person who'd seen you at your worst and loved you anyway. "Stay with me tonight," Eleanor whispered. "Not in the guest wing. Here. With me." "Yes. And tomorrow. Tomorrow we figure out the rest. Together." They walked upstairs hand in hand, and for the first time in 23 years, Dominic felt like he was finally home. If you're still here, if this broke you and put you back together in all the right ways, I need you to subscribe. Because this is what we do here. Stories that cost something. Love that waits too long and still finds a way. Late-night confessions that sound like whiskey and second chances. This is your place. Stay with us. 2 years later. The foundation gala was in full swing. 200 donors, program directors, scholarship recipients filling the estate's ballroom. Eleanor stood at the center of it all in a midnight blue gown, laughing at something a major donor was saying, radiant in the way of women who found their purpose. Dominic watched her from across the room, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and felt the same surge of gratitude and wonder he felt every morning when he woke up next to her. They'd married quietly 6 months after he'd come back. Small ceremony, no guests, just them and a judge and the ocean as witness. Eleanor had worn cream lace and carried wildflowers. Dominic had cried through the entire thing. They'd rebuilt the foundation together. Expanded programs into 6 new states. Tripled the scholarship fund. Created an arts residency that was already changing lives. But more than that, they'd rebuilt themselves. Learned to fight productively, to apologize sincerely, to choose each other even when it was hard. They'd gone to therapy, both individual and couples. They'd had hard conversations about trust and trauma and whether love was enough to overcome history. They decided it was. But only if you did the work. Eleanor caught his eye across the room and smiled, and Dominic felt it like a physical thing, the connection between them, earned and precious and real. She excused herself from the conversation and crossed to him. "You're brooding," she said, slipping her hand into his. "I'm reflecting. Is there a difference? With me?" "Not really." He kissed her temple. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am." "That's unusually sentimental for you." "I'm allowed to be sentimental. I almost lost this twice. I get to be grateful it exists at all." Eleanor leaned into him. "I got something today." "What?" She reached into her clutch and pulled out an envelope. "Cream stationery, expensive. Her mother's personal stock." Dominic's breath caught. "What is this?" "My mother's lawyer called me this morning. Apparently, she left a letter with instructions to deliver it 2 years after her death." "Only if," Eleanor's voice caught. "Only if you and I were still together." She knew. She always knew. Eleanor opened the envelope with shaking hands. "Read the first few lines silently, then out loud." "My dearest Eleanor. If you're reading this, then I was right. And I was also wrong. I was right that Dominic Ashford would build an empire. I was right that at 26, he wasn't ready to choose you over his ambition. I was right that forcing you two apart would give you both the space to become who you needed to be. But I was wrong to think that would be the end of the story. I've watched you both from a distance these past 2 decades. I've seen what that separation cost you. I've seen Eleanor build a beautiful, meaningful life while carrying a wound that never quite healed. I've seen Dominic achieve everything he set out to achieve and still look empty. So I did what I do best. I meddled. I brought you back together under circumstances you couldn't refuse. I forced you to work side by side, to remember who you'd been and see who you'd become. I gambled that if you'd both grown enough, changed enough, learned enough from your losses, maybe you'd get it right this time. If you're reading this together, I won. And more importantly, you won. Dominic, I'm sorry for what I took from you. But I'm not sorry for what it taught you. Love without sacrifice is just sentiment. You had to learn to sacrifice for something that mattered. I hope Eleanor has taught you how. Eleanor, my brilliant, stubborn, beautiful girl. I'm sorry I broke your heart. But I'm not sorry you learned to live through it. You needed to know you could survive on your own before you could truly share a life with someone else. You're both strong enough now. Ready enough. Changed enough. Build something beautiful together. The foundation, yes, but more than that. Build a life that honors both your strengths. Build a love that's been tested and survived. And if there are children. Eleanor's voice broke. She couldn't continue. Dominic took the letter gently, read the last lines. If there are children, tell them their grandmother was a meddling terror who loved them before they were born. Tell them that sometimes the longest way around is the shortest way home. Tell them that love is worth fighting for, even when the fight takes decades. I love you both. I always did. Even when I was breaking your hearts, I loved you. Now stop reading this and go live your lives. Margaret. They stood together in silence as the gala swirled around them, holding her mother's final gift. She really was a terror, Eleanor whispered. The best kind. Do you think she knew? Eleanor put her hand on her stomach, the gesture unconscious and telling. Dominic's heart stopped. Eleanor. 6 weeks. I found out this morning. I was going to tell you tonight, after the gala, somewhere private, but, she laughed through tears. Leave it to my mother to steal my thunder even from beyond the grave. He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair, felt tears sliding down his face. We're having a baby. We're having a baby. Eleanor. I know. I'm terrified too. But this time I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I promise you, I'm here. She kissed him then, soft and fierce and full of promise, and Dominic understood that some stories don't end where you think they will. Some stories take decades to write. Some love waits 23 years and still finds its way home. They stood together in the house that had witnessed their breaking and their healing, surrounded by people whose lives they'd changed, carrying the future they'd almost lost twice. And it was enough. It was everything. So tell me. What are you feeling right now? Drop one word in the comments. Just one. The word that's sitting in your chest after this. And if you want more of this, stories that hurt and heal, that take their time and earn their endings, that understand what it means to love when you're old enough to know what it costs, subscribe. This is where you belong. Late nights. Real love. Stories that remember you have a heart. We'll be here. Waiting.